Hello again, and with me today is a futurist, Tracey Follows, and I haven't spoken to many futurists in the past, so I'm looking forward, Tracey, to today's conversation. Welcome. Tracey, let's just begin with who is Tracey Follows and how did you become you?
What a great question, Ger. I'm Tracey Follows. I'm a futurist. I've been a futurist for about 10 years, but I think I've always been a futurist in a funny sort of way. But before that, I worked in advertising and media for about 20 years. So I've always been interested in the future, always been interested in science fiction, imagination, and thinking about alternative possible worlds. And that's what I do in my day job now. I created my own job, and that's really how I got here, I think.
Tell us about what the future... I don't see any crystal balls on the shelves behind you, for example. Tell us what a futurist does on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, well, really what I'm always doing, and I never stop doing, even when I'm not futuring, is I'm looking for signals of change, spending a lot of time, at the frontiers of, digital technologies, other technologies, biotechnology, art, science and business, and trying to, across those different sectors, connect the dots and looking at where we are seeing signals of the future, like pockets of the future in the present, these tiny little clues as to what might be heading towards us, or we are heading towards in the future. So in a funny sort of way, and rather ironically, Ger, a futurist never really knows what's coming the next week, because it could be any kind of project on any kind of future.
The futurists that I read about, I just wanted to kind of, now that I've got you, I wanted to ask this. Are you all pessimists? Because the news that seems to come out about the future is that nobody will have any jobs, nobody will be doing anything, the world's coming to an end. You must have good days.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people often ask me what excites me and what terrifies me about the future, and I always say exactly the same thing. It's the same things that both excite me and terrify me. I've always described myself as an anxious optimist, i.e. I'm optimistic about the future, but I'm also anxious that it might not be quite as optimistic as that. And so we always need to be thinking around, the safeguards, the guidelines, the out of control nature that not just technology might take on, but humans can get more out of control than technology. So I think I'm optimistic in general, but I'm only optimistic because I think we need to be very vigilant about things.
I wanted to go back in time, if I may, and that's about your school days, because somewhere at the beginning of that journey that was and is becoming you. What was your experience like at school?
I was bullied really, really badly at school, for about 2 years. I mean, nobody in the class spoke to me for 2 years. And I remember, because I loved the subjects and I loved being taught, if you like, but I really found it a bit of a challenge being in the class with people who didn't want me to be there. And obviously, as we went through middle school and I went into high school, things changed, and I enjoyed high school very much. I had one or two very prominent teachers who kind of took me under their wing. I remember their names, Mr. Eccleston and Mr. Brown, who were very kind to me and really could see some sort of potential in me. And I think that really makes such a big difference once somebody can spot some potential in you and they can act as a mentor. And you feel kind of safer in that environment.
It's interesting, that role model thing, isn't it? The role of the teacher and how that kind of connects. It's very often when you talk to people about those teachers that you mentioned, that it isn't, they were brilliant at geography or they were great at German or whatever they were. It's about being people and how they invested in us, in you, how that whole empathy piece plays out, and I suppose the whole kind of emotional intelligence. And I can't help but sneak that question in now, which is about, so the emotional intelligence and the empathy part was so important to you, particularly in the junior school, as you described. So this thing that is being thrown around by people occasionally, which is that we won't have any teachers in the future because it'll all be done by AI and robots or whatever their future may hold. How do you think, if at all, that can be squared?
Well, to your point, it depends what you think teaching is. And we've just discussed the emotional and empathetic elements of teaching, like the mentoring, the coaching, the supporting, not just the translation of information. So when we think about the integration of AI into the personalization of learning for students, really, it should uplift the role of the teacher from one of facilitating and administrating lots of parts of their job to more of a coaching and mentoring role. If AI can take on board some of the more routine tasks, some of the lesson planning, this sort of stuff. And I've seen teachers doing this. I've seen them using, for example, ChatGPT already, to lesson plan, to take account of neurodivergent students in that lesson plan, to also, set out the lesson in a way that lots of different types of students can interact with that lesson, and it can be taught by a different type of person if you want it to be. Those are all the sorts of inputs, and the output should be something that is greatly useful to the teacher, but doesn't substitute the teacher, because the teacher is still there and having to guide and coach and mentor the student.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's all sorts of other aspects. I'm quite excited about it. I think it will require a massive investment in all sorts of ways into the teaching professions, plural. But the idea that we can bring greater awe and wonder into the classroom through the use of technology, I'm all for this, and that's very interesting. If that then sits next to a fairly recent World Economic Forum report that is kind of saying the 8 jobs that won't disappear. I love that angle, right? Yes. And the 8 jobs that won't disappear, and surprise, surprise, they are the jobs that contain that kind of emotional intelligence, the empathy, what we in old money perhaps call the caring professions. And I do like it that we're having the discussion about who is the teacher and how will the job change. And of course it needs to change. It's changing all the time anyway, rather than let's get rid of it, right?
I would say, Ger, I think it's more that the classroom's going to disappear, not the teacher. So the traditional classroom of 30 students in a classroom with maybe one teacher at the front, maybe another teacher supporting, that kind of formula or that kind of format, I think that is what is going to be disintegrated and disappear to an extent, not altogether, but to an extent, and not the role of teacher. We've always had teachers, and we've always had students and learners, and forever really. But we haven't always had classrooms, and I think that's what's potentially going to disappear, because now technology can reach beyond the classroom. As Marshall McLuhan said, it's classroom without walls, and actually everywhere is a learning opportunity and everywhere is a teaching opportunity, and that is going to be facilitated and enabled by technology. If we think of this as a more sort of decentralised, networked model of learning, I think that takes us to completely new and different sort of peer-to-peer, flatter structures, and not necessarily the kind of, industrial model, if you like, as people often call it, of a classroom.
Tracey, we talked about the changing in the teaching professions, plural, and the changing in terms of the environment and classrooms without walls. In that partnership between media and education, how do you see then how the media contribution to this needs to evolve?
So I think the biggest challenge for media is it's still working by some of the old rules around authenticity, if you like. So having original authorship and that author being one person and delivering content to some other audience, which is very separate. And I think what we're seeing with the evolution of media, which will take us to these multiverses or augmented reality, is the acknowledgement that even with more traditional, it's funny to say that video is traditional media now, isn't it? But even with something like video, that it becomes more open-ended. What we are seeing is that as everything gets digitized, there are no dead ends to media. You cannot create a piece of media, send it out to an audience and expect it to be absorbed, if you like, by that audience, that they are just engaged with that and it's closed. It isn't closed. There's always a feedback loop to this now, and there are always alternatives. So increasingly we are thinking about what was or is termed now more traditional media as being a set of layers or a set of assets that are put together in a way that's mixed, remixed, arranged, rearranged continually in order to appeal to different individuals or different audiences or different groups of people. And I think that's the key learning for how traditional media moves into this more novel, avant-garde sort of world of augmented media or mixed reality, whatever you want to call it, which is we need to break down media into the individual assets, into the individual elements, and that those are combined and recombined in a myriad, infinite number of ways in order to appeal to lots and lots of different types of people, audiences, groups, tribes, whatever. There is no consensus anymore in media. There is only resonance. So the question is, does this media, whether it's education, entertainment, a blend of the two, does it resonate with this group? Not is it delivering a consensus, a truth, if you like. And I think that's the big change, the big shift on from traditional media. It's not easy to do, but I think that's the evolution for it now.
What, in your view, if we look at the current system, UK-based, but if we look at the current goings-on in schooling and in education, what's missing?
What's missing? I think what's missing is the harnessing of the individual potential of a young person at a young age. I mean, you'll appreciate this, I know, Ger. But I think there is something around a very young age, maybe 7 or 8, when a child knows pretty much what they're interested in, or they have a passion for something and they want to pursue it. Now, oftentimes it becomes a hobby. But I think the education system as it's built at the moment can't or won't or doesn't want to get into that and doesn't want to personalise an education plan, if you like, for that individual student, and to do it in a way that harnesses the purpose or the mission or the obsession or the interest that the individual child has. No, it needs to fit into this education format, which is, and it's lazy to say this, but it's one size fits all. Now, when I spoke to Audrey Tang, who's the digital minister in Taiwan, when I was researching my book, we weren't necessarily talking about education, but she went on to say that she had dismantled the curriculum in order to carry out a pilot study where they took 7 or 8-year-olds and they tried to identify what their personal purpose was and then build these personalised curricula for the individual student or the individual learner, and that they'd had a lot of success with that. So, in summary, I say it's about harnessing the individual child's personal potential and purpose and building a curriculum around them individually. And I think that is going to be, whichever country, whichever nation state, whichever group, whichever technology platform, because it might be that the technology platforms harness this and are able to deliver it to children. I think that is going to be the breakthrough that we get in education.
Yeah, it's interesting. I totally agree. I think we need to make a greater effort to know our children better, rather than the narrow data that flows out of going to school and being taught and being tested. We need to look elsewhere for that information. And also what you said kind of reminded me of my old friend Ken Robinson's views around we teach creativity out of children. And actually, if you look at at a 7, 8-year-old, they are mostly confident, and many of them are confident learners, and quite a lot of them enjoy it. And then the system chips away at that. And then by the time they get to teenage years, much of that's disappeared, and that's sad. And I think we need to deploy other forms of learning and match up with other forms of learning in order to get some of that back, get some of that joy back. And that kind of takes me to the next question, which is about the worlds of media and the worlds of education and schooling. And to me, they feel very separate at times. What's your view on that? Why should they work together more closely, and to what outcome, really?
Well, Marshall McLuhan said, I think as far back as 1960, that anyone who tries to make a distinction between education and entertainment doesn't know anything about either of them. And I think he makes a really great point in his writings that education has always started as entertainment. So even if we think about somebody sitting down and learning English literature, and let's say they're faced with the plays of William Shakespeare, what was that in its day? It was entertainment, wasn't it? And I think we should think much more like this. I would say that we kind of come to the future, or come to the present day, and we think about Roblox. Something like Roblox. So it's a game building platform. I think there's about 25% of the users on Roblox as a platform are under 9 years old. There's 20 million unique users a day. There's 40 million games on there. This isn't small potatoes. It's absolutely huge. And I think from my research of talking to people, both parents and looking at what kids are doing, is they are using that, what we might be termed an entertainment platform, as an education space. It is a classroom without walls. The metaverse is literally the classroom without walls. And we watch these children building their own villages, their own towns, building jobs and skills, building a bridge to take people from here to there. It's basically world building, and they're doing it in this digital or virtual environment. And I think that's really exciting, and it's the best example we've got, I think, of education and entertainment being completely fused, being exactly the same thing. Unfortunately, outside of that virtual platform, there are a lot of people that don't understand that this is going on, or they don't know how to integrate that with the more traditional forms of education and the more, physical building of a classroom. But all of this is happening. And I very much believe that this is the new sort of entertainment space that will become the education space. So the whole idea of immersive learning, these kids are in an immersive space, that's going to be their expectation of, more formal education, isn't it? Why would you do all of this world building, have all of these experiences, and then suddenly pop out of it when you become a certain age to go into an education system that isn't experiential and is all about, learn by being told rather than learn by doing. And I think that's the big schism, and that's why entertainment and education should be closer, because they always have been and they always will be. It's up to us to acknowledge that and make the best of it and use it to its full potential, which we're probably not doing at the minute.
And I also think, incidentally, that your view on the gap between what goes on in school and what children and young people experience in learning terms out of school, that gap's getting bigger, and I think it's getting bigger very rapidly. And that is driven by technology, right? Because in school, I'm quite often only allowed to use it in a very limited way, whereas the minute I leave school on the bus on the way home, the world's in the palm of my hand, and it's my oyster.
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, I can understand the banning of mobile phones in certain scenarios, in certain environments in school, but soon you won't be able to do that because it won't be on a device like that. We'll have spatial computing. And that will be the new platform, and actually we'll be enabled to understand and experience the virtual world, the digital world around us ambiently, not on a distracting sort of black screen, a mobile phone. So once you take that device away, because screens are going to recede and we'll have the content of the what we used to access via a screen, but the content will will exist around us in a more ambient way. And so you won't be able to just say, take your mobile phone away or switch this device, because it won't be on a device. It will be all around us in the ether. And that's going to be something that I think the education system needs to step into, rather than keep, trying to keep at bay.
That's really interesting. You were talking there essentially about kind of bridging that divide between education and media in a way that I'd not thought about, that screens are old hat. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, because I think this is the most exciting aspect. I mean, people often talk about virtual reality and augmented reality, and people will probably know that virtual reality is very much the stereotypical sort of person in a headset locked into a virtual world where they are on their own, and there's a lot of narrative around, isn't that a bit atomized and lonely? And of course it isn't once you're accessed into that world, because you're with everybody else who's there as an avatar. But what's very interesting to watch is something like Apple, and as you probably know, Apple launched its Vision Pro probably about 6 months ago. And it specifically, Tim Cook specifically said, the Mac introduced us to personal computing as the platform. The iPhone, the mobile, introduced us to mobile as the new platform. Apple Vision Pro is going to introduce us to the spatial computing platform. And there are some wonderful demonstration videos of what this looks like. Okay, somebody has a sort of headset on, but they're not locked out of the physical world. They can see people sitting next to them, but they're also immersed in this augmented reality, which is a digital overlay onto the physical world. It's not going to be typing that's going to be the main mode of communication with these new technologies. It's going to be voice and emotion and probably also biometrics. So the technology will be analysing us, our emotions, our expressions, to try and read us, to work out what's making us happy, what's making us engaged, perhaps where we have a bit of anxiety. And so we are moving into what they might say is a mixed reality. So it's a blend of physical and digital. And this opens up great possibilities for education, I think. And I've seen it probably best in some of the virtual sort of metaversities, the digital twins of physical universities, if you like, but where you can walk into the lab, and rather than walking into a physical lab, you're walking into a lab and you've got a cadaver there. You can walk straight into the heart. If you are doing a biology experiment, it's not that you have the heart to dissect in front of you, on a desk or something. You are literally walking in and amongst all of the organ, the heart. And so you are literally immersed in the subject that you are learning about. You're not separated from it. You're not divorced from it. You're not looking on and observing it. You are literally within it, immersed. And this is the new experience. And I think it doesn't matter whether you are, young, learning about dinosaurs, and so you're learning about dinosaurs on a dinosaur island, or you're doing astronomy and you're literally in the Milky Way. One can see this massive transformation of education, that we are no longer separate from the subject matter that we are studying. We are within it, and that only becomes possible because of entertainment and education becoming blended in that way.
It's amazing. As I was listening to you, I'm thinking back to my childhood and films that came from the books of Jules Verne. And Jules Verne was described as a fantasist. Maybe he was less of a fantasist and more of a futurist. Tracey, I have one question left, which is, what one thing would you like our viewers to take away from our conversation today?
I'd love everybody to think that the future is plural. There's a plurality to everything that we're heading towards, partly made possible by digitisation and technology, but partly made possible naturally by the trends. And once we think of a world that isn't about mono, but is more about multi, we can start to get to a world where there is personalisation of education plans. There's personalisation of fulfilling our potential, and AI is going to make this possible. It's going to make plurality of education plans possible. So I think that's what we need to think about, that the future is plural, education is plural, and that's going to give us the possibility of unlimited potential for every single individual student or learner in the future.
Tracey, thank you so much, and thank you for being with us today, for sharing some of your yesterdays and lifting the veil on the tomorrows. I'm sure you and I will catch up on our travels somewhere in the future. Take good care. Thanks ever so much. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Thank you.